your phone? What does that mean?
You can't turn your phone over. It's okay, start.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to another ICSA conversation. And today we have the privilege of having a very interesting talk by Miss Cathy Harris, who is a licensed clinical social worker in San Diego, California. She's been there for over 20 years, with 20 years experience training and educating about cultic groups and trauma. Cathy trained for the MSW, the Master of Social Work degree, at the Timberlawn Inpatient Trauma Unit under the direction of Dr. Colin Ross in Dallas, Texas. She has maintained a private practice from the time she became independently licensed in 2004. And she's been licensed in various states, Iowa, Arizona, California, and Texas. In addition, she has worked as an in-home therapist at inpatient and outpatient hospital settings, as a residential counselor with adults and adolescents coping with addictions. She's worked as a crisis center clinician, a mobile crisis counselor, and military family life counselor, and licensed independent practitioner with the U.S. Navy's Residential Substance Abuse Program in San Diego. Throughout her career, she has endeavored to share her knowledge and experience working with trauma-informed perspective. Cathy became a Jehovah's Witness at the age of 17 and left the group at age 43. So it is my great pleasure to give you Cathy Harris.
Thank you so much, Dwayne.
You're welcome. Let me just switch here.
Okay. Hello out there in live stream land and here in person. Thank you for being here today. So as Tony said, I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience having been in a cultic group, what I now identify as a cultic group, how I got out of it, and then a little bit about my work with those who have endeavored to leave groups or cope with the after effect of being in groups. So there's a short PowerPoint here that you online won't be able to see, but I will put it on my website later and you'll be able to see it. So I named my talk, Can a Fish See Water? That's a phrase that was said to me by someone I met when I was in college in Ames, Iowa. This person had picked this phrase up out of a science fiction story, and I always liked it because it really explained my experience coming to terms with the idea that I had actually been in a cult or high control group. We're going to talk about who joins cults and why, what makes individuals begin to question their group involvement, and what if no qualified support is available. That certainly was my case in a small college town in Iowa. I did have a therapist, but really didn't get too far with her as I was going through leaving, didn't really have that kind of support. How can family members and friends help their loved ones who are involved, and what challenges do survivors face as they recover, and how can parents help their children resist participation? So when I was 17 years old, I was in Indianapolis, Indiana. My mother had been a Jehovah's Witness up till when I was about 2 years old. And when she left my father and we married, that was called adultery by the Watchtower Society. And so I was not raised in the religion, but I view myself as having been raised with the influence of the religion. So we celebrated holidays and everything else that anybody else does, but there was never any tradition or anything religious ever connected with those things. So once I was a junior in high school, my mother had gotten back into the religion. The rest of my family was studying, my brother and sister and my stepfather. I myself was a wannabe hippie in Indiana, stuck in Indiana, a little war protester. I used to lead the walkouts in junior high. I was proud of that. But my family was fairly dysfunctional. There was a lot of alcoholism. I didn't really have any goals. There hadn't been any college funding set aside for me. So when my mom got back into the religion, after we kind of fought about it for a while, because we had a very push-pull kind of a relationship, I got into it after being really love-bombed. The witnesses have big conventions every summer, and my mom got all the young people in the congregation there to ask me to go camping. So I went off and joined God's Happiest People. Really, though, what I really wanted to do at that time, I wanted to join up with something called the Students for Democratic Society, and I wanted to get into the Weatherman faction, which was the violent faction. The very weekend that I was to go join and talk to somebody about that, I actually started studying with the witnesses. So I view it as maybe the religion maybe saved my life. I might have gone down some paths that might not have been very safe for me, or different kind of cults. Now, what I want to emphasize about the witnesses is that when they go door to door, this is what they show you. And this is what draws people in. Wouldn't you like to live here? Who wouldn't like to live here? Isn't it unreasonable that we die after 70 or 80 years? So that's what's emphasized. Not the fact that once you commit to the religion, you can't change your mind or grow out of the need for the religion. If you break the rules, which there are rules for everything, as many of you may know if you're ever associated with this group, you can't celebrate holidays. They have rules as to where you can work and who you can work for. They have rules as to what kind of sex you can have with your marriage mate. And so you're always saying, what does the society say, referring to the Watchtower Society. You don't think about the idea, and they do not emphasize the idea that you will be excommunicated and barred from interaction with family and friends if you break the rules. You sign a lifelong contract. At 17 years old, looking back on it, I don't think I was really equipped to make that kind of decision. And now I understand that children as young as 8 years old are getting baptized, and they certainly aren't equipped to make that kind of decision. So who joins these kinds of groups? Anyone can join these kinds of groups. But the research shows that often people are in kind of a transition phase. Very often it's young people. And what we have now is various groups that are recruiting on college campuses. I have worked with some folks who are worried about their 19-year-old adult children and asked me to help them make a better decision with some groups that are recruiting on campuses. The other group of people that are in a religion like this are second, third, fourth, fifth generation. Now, when I met people online, as I was beginning to leave the religion and then be in contact with groups of people who were out or wanted to be out or were thinking about being out, I met people who actually had Christmas in their attic because they were fourth or fifth generation and they didn't want their parents, of course, to know, the grandparents. And though I didn't know anything much about psychology back then, now I know that that's not a really very healthy thing for children to be put through. So the commitment, when you get baptized, and when I got baptized, I only studied with the witnesses for 3 months. I studied what they called the truth book, the little blue book. I got through that in about 3 weeks, and then I studied the Babylon the Great book, and I was really good at going back and forth in the Bible and quoting all the scriptures so you could know that I knew that we're in the last days and you're going to die if you don't listen to me. So when I got into this, broke up with my boyfriend, threw away all my Beatle albums, all my Beatle trading cards, blacklight posters, stuff that would be worth a lot of money right now. Got rid of my mini skirts and my bell bottoms and put on what they call the new personality. When I look back on that, I wonder, wow, where did I go? Because I submerged. My true self, which was starting to come out at 17 years old, was submerged. And for the next 26 years, I was married eventually to someone for 15 years. He didn't have a job when we got married, but he was in the religion, and that's all that counted. I had a little Corvair my dad had given me. I came out here in '74 to meet my dad, who was in the religion. I had not been raised with him. And now I know that he probably wouldn't have had much to do with me if I hadn't been in the religion. But I knew him for about 3 years, and then he died. But he gave me a little Corvair. I don't know if you know what a Corvair is or was, but they were discontinued because Ralph Nader showed that they flipped over. I tried to make mine flip over, and it just wouldn't do that. For most of that time, I dealt with anxiety and depression. Having come out of a family that was pretty steeped in alcoholism, I kind of had some of the common things that come with that. I helped my husband in his landscape business. There's a little thing that's said when people get baptized in this religion that when you come up out of the water, they hand you either your cleaning license or your landscaping license. So I helped my husband in his landscaping business, and I cleaned houses. Sometimes I worked at Price Club before it was Costco. But that was off and on because, of course, I wasn't supposed to be working as a female. I was supposed to be out going door to door. So after divorce in 1991, I landed in Des Moines, Iowa. I had had a suicide attempt where I had ended up in a hospital for ICU for 3 days, intensive care unit for 3 days. And then they put me in an alcohol treatment place for 3 weeks because they didn't have anywhere else to put me in Midlands, Texas. I was a single mother of a special needs child and had been dealing with ongoing depression. I was broke and had no skills. I was living in an apartment with no furniture. My son and I were sleeping on little swimmy rafts. So I talked myself into the idea that my son was better off without me. And so my brother, who I had kind of raised and gotten into the religion, he's a few years younger than me, came down and got my son, came down from Iowa. So after the debacle in Texas, I took myself up to Iowa. And on the way up there, I stopped in Kansas City and got gas. And it was November, maybe 30 degrees out. I lived in San Diego for 20 years. Got out pumping gas, I burst into tears. I realized what I was doing. I was going back to a place I did not like, and my situation had not changed. And so I was not a very happy person. By the age of 43, 1996, I was out of the religion. I had been in school for a couple of years. I went ahead and started college, even though it was still not approved by the Watchtower Society. My little motto that I would say was, I just need something to do until Armageddon gets here. I need to have something to do to put one foot in front of the other until Armageddon gets here. And so getting an education, having access to a huge, huge library was, for me, what really helped me. And I was away from, I had many, many friends here in San Diego. When I was in school in Iowa, all my friends in San Diego couldn't wait till I was going to get back here so I could be the therapist for all the witnesses. So I could be the therapist for their mother-in-law or their sister or whoever else, not them, of course. So that was the plan, but by the end of my first couple years in school, I was out. There were many reasons why I got out. Putting together this talk made me really think about why did I get out? How did I do that, and why? So a lot of things came together. For many years, the Watchtower Society had been addressing the issue of sexual abuse, repressed memory, and that kind of thing, which was something that was very big in the minds of myself and many of my friends, my female friends. And so there began to be conflicting messages in the Awake magazine and the Watchtower magazine about that issue. And if anybody in the audience follows this today, you may know that they are being investigated almost around the world for their cover-up of sexual abuse. In my own case, I was married to someone who admitted to molesting my best friend and midwife at our son's birth, molesting one of her children. I didn't find this out until 4 years later. I didn't have anyone to talk to about it. I insisted that he go and talk to the elders, but because I was the wife, they did not bother to talk to me. He admitted what he had done to me, and 10 years later, when I was divorcing him, I found out that he had lied to them and said she'd only sat on his lap. So that's one of the big issues with that, is they cover this up by the patriarchy is part of why the cover-up happens. Because I'm not counted. I'm not important. I'm not the spiritual head of the family. When the male is in trouble for something like this, the wife is not brought into any of these discussions at all. If they would have asked me one question, they would have gotten some corroborating evidence. But of course, then they have their two-witness rule. So it was the little girl's word against his. My son, at the time that I began to think about leaving, was 15, 16 years old. He'd always been very compliant. He's a person with high-functioning autism. He didn't talk at the door. He didn't give talks when he was 5 years old, and that was always dismaying to me, but fortunately I didn't push him a lot. But he asked me some innocent questions about, the brothers keep saying Armageddon's coming, but it's not coming. I don't understand. And the other one was, why can't I grow my hair long? What's the big deal? And I would start to parrot the reasons, and then I would stop myself and say, I don't know, go ahead, grow your hair long. I don't care. And so that him being there with me and asking those questions were kind of like helped with grow the cognitive dissonance, really. I was also reading books about codependence and learning about myself as what I then called a codependent. And one day I was standing on someone's door about to knock and thought to myself, how much more codependent and controlling of other people can I be? I'm going to stand here and tell people that if they don't believe like me and worship the God that I worship, that they're going to die. That just didn't seem right to me, and it was shocking for me to have that idea. So around that time, again, I came out here and visited at one point, and I was sitting in on a Bible study with someone, and I realized I don't believe this stuff anymore. And it was shocking to me to think that. I had always been a strong one. I had pioneered, which meant in my time 100 hours a month on my dime, to go door to door, wind and rain, snow and sleet, heat and humidity, it didn't matter. And so realizing that was very shocking to me. I started struggling with attending meetings. They started, after they had actually given permission for people to go to college, then they started criticizing it, and that didn't make any sense to me. There was some issues regarding my son. He needed friends. None of the kids in the Kingdom Hall would befriend him, and I would talk to the lawyers, the elders about it, and cry, and because I wanted to do what was right. My son couldn't befriend with worldly people, right? So all in all these things came together for me. Being away from all my friends here was actually helpful. I hated it, but it was actually helpful. The education, because I was in psychology and what they called human development and family sciences, I had classes about patriarchy. I had women's studies classes. And I began to wake up the feminist inside me, the activist inside me, and the social worker inside of me. The other thing that was really helpful were English classes that talked about critical thinking and false arguments, which I had never heard anything about. The big one for me was circular reasoning. I talked to a friend one time back here, a male friend, about not going to meetings anymore, and his big things, as well as many other people at the time, was it's the governing body, the men in New York that wrote all the publications and ran everything. It's the governing body. As soon as the governing body changes, everything will be okay. And I said, well, who says there's a governing body? The governing body. He didn't get that I was saying I'm stepping away from that. I don't have any respect for a governing body anymore. They have appointed themselves. That was a really big one for me, as well as what are called straw man arguments. If you ever look at the Watchtower magazines, it's full of ad hominem arguments, which is attack the person and don't really talk about what you've been asked or what the actual issue is. So I learned these things in English classes, just normal 101 English comp and English grammar type classes. So one of the things I had to really examine was my beliefs and the whole matter of belief in the first place. So here are a couple of the dictionary definitions of belief. Belief is an acceptance that a statement is true or that something exists, or the state of mind in which a person thinks something to be the case with or without there being empirical evidence to prove that something is the case with factual certainty. I realized that just because I had believed something all my life and lived for it and breathed it and gone door to door and gone through all these hardships to stay faithful, it didn't make it true. There was no Armageddon that was coming as far as I came to the conclusion. And so at the same time, because now I've become a person who I like to say I live in and. I don't like but, I like to live in and. So and I have learned this. Believe that life is worth living and your belief will help create the fact. I have learned that how I think, the way I think, the words I use, these do create my reality. But I choose these words. No one chooses them for me. So these are two books that really helped me a lot. The Orwellian World of Jehovah's Witnesses, written by Heather and Gary Botting. They were two ex-witnesses out of Canada. And then Robert Lifton's book, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism. So I learned about Lifton's 8 criteria. And when I learned that criteria, it was, well, does a fish see water? I've been in a cult. I couldn't believe it. When I recognized these 8 criteria fit what I had been living, it was like, well, I thought cults were the things they told me were, Jonestown, Hare Krishnas, Moonies, those are all cults, not us. But then when I looked at this information, I saw that factually, this is a cult, and a destructive cult. The Orwellian world of Jehovah's Witnesses, that one was terrifying. They compare everything that happens in this religion to 1984, this story 1984. And I had never watched the movie or read the book. Somehow I missed that in high school. So I stayed up late one night at 2 o'clock in the morning by myself, my son asleep in the other room, watching this movie, and it terrified me, and it was the final thing that made me know I cannot stay in this. And I began to think in terms of personal integrity, which was an alien term, an alien idea. So when I talk about all the reasons that I left and how it came together, I invite anybody here that has left a group like that to think about what were your reasons. Because sometimes when you're out and you're being shunned, you don't get to have contact with your family or your old friends, it can be really difficult, very, very difficult, and you might forget why you did this. But I invite you to think about whatever your reasons were for doing that, because you came to some conclusion that was truth for you. So this is just an overview of the 8 criteria. I'm not going to go over those. I will let you know that one of my aims is to help other therapists. There's so many therapists that think, I heard somebody say before the talk that people are fascinated. People are fascinated and terrified by cults. And therapists think that they can't help people. Oh, I don't know anything about that. But they do know things that can help. And that's one of my aims, is to help people understand these 8 criteria. Because on my website, and one of the reasons I've associated myself with ICSA is because they don't do this either. A lot of ex-cult websites, they'll give you these long lists of what they believe a cult is. I don't want to do that for people. I want people to be able to identify them for themselves if the group that they've been in or thinking about being in is a cult or a high control group, or if it's a destructive cult for them. My thing now is I don't care what people believe as long as nobody comes preaching at me at my door. And if children aren't getting hurt. The problem with a lot of these groups, they're what we call closed systems, and children do get hurt in these groups. So what I want you to think about is this word that we use a lot in these circles. It's the first word in culture. We all need groups. We all need community. But we need to look at the groups that we're in and the communities that we're in. Are they upbuilding for us, or do they drag us down? Do they keep us from fulfilling our own human potential? Do they try to regulate every little part of our life and give us promises that they can't keep? So a lot of times people stay and don't leave these groups because they have been, they're 3rd or 4th generation. There's a lot of deception in these kinds of groups, of course, that keep people in. There's a lot of fear, guilt, and intimidation. And then, of course, the big one, the threat of shunning. This is the social control that's happened. And then the dependence that people have. If you, like myself, you're 40 years old and you don't have many job skills, more and more in this world, it's pretty hard to make a living if you don't have some kind of education. Now, it can be done, but it's not as easy as it was 30 or 40 years ago. People leave because, number one, cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance, for me, was when my experience that I began to put weight on and pay attention to did not line up with what I had been taught and what I was hearing at these meetings. And instead of using the thought-stopping ideas that they put forth, I began to put those aside and follow my thoughts to, this doesn't make sense to me anymore. I don't believe this anymore. Again, like I said earlier, it was shocking to me to come to the conclusion that I don't believe these things anymore. That's one thing that does happen sometimes for people, is people pretty quickly, when they get away from a group, they pretty quickly recover from believing all the teachings that they were steeped in. Sometimes people are burned out. Sometimes they are. That's a criticism that a finger that's pointed by the Watchtower Society, oh, the apostates just don't want to do the preaching work. Well, yeah, if you've done it for 40 years and then millions now living did die. That was one of the big talks in the 40s. Millions now living will never die. Now they're trying to say, they said millions now living may never die, but no, it was will never die. So one of the things that was a real revelation for me, my father, I only knew my father for 3 years. He died of cancer, and he died very angry at Jehovah, at his God, because he was never going to get sick and die. He had always pioneered. He didn't have anything. He owned nothing. He had no money. And he'd spent his whole life, from a young adult, serving this God in this organization. And he wasn't mad at the organization. He was mad at his God when he died. And after that time, years later, when I was in school, and I had this revelation to myself, because I was very upset with my dad. He's spiritually weak, was my judgment at the time. And I realized that generations of people had gone from before me, believing like I did, because I naively was like, no, you don't understand. It's in my time that the new world is going to come. So that's why you weren't patient enough. You'll be resurrected, whatever. So when I got that little revelation that, wait, all these people have gone to their graves. Sometimes they didn't have children, they didn't buy homes, they didn't have careers, because they believed what this religion, this organization told them, and they went to they went to their graves angry and upset and brokenhearted, because it is heartbreaking. My heart was broken when all this was going on. It was like I had this boyfriend. Of course, it was a boyfriend that loved me, but it was always waiting to catch me in something, right? So it was this kind of two-sided boyfriend. But it was like losing my boyfriend and not being able to replace that boyfriend, my God. Because in my case, I did not do what we call snapping. I did not snap into another religion. I was in college. I probably would call myself more of a humanist now than anything else. So that it was a big loss that was going on there. So one of the things I wanted to share with you is ways that I coped, because as I said, I didn't really have therapy. I'm not going to play this song. There's a song by John Lennon. So I'm old, so I'm a Beatles fan. It's called God. One of them is God. This one was I Found Out. And there's a line in it that says, there ain't no Jesus going to come from the sky. And it hit me that there is, because I'd lived my whole life for this new system thing. Life was always out there. You can't have a horse because it's too expensive. You'll have horses in the new system. You can't go to college. You don't need to learn those things now. You'll be able to learn these things in the new system. And when I re-listened to music that had meant one thing to me when I was younger and became something else at this time, it was very helpful to me to have kind of those, those kind of F you moments. So some of the things that were really helpful for me was music. There was some online support. Now this was in 1993, so there weren't even pictures on the internet. It was all text. And I got on this little primitive BBS, a bulletin board system. And it wasn't like live chat, but you could send people messages back and forth pretty quickly. And there was one called Philia and one called AJWR, Associated Jehovah's Witnesses for Reform. Has anyone ever heard of that one? It's still around. There are two big things, are the blood issue and shunning. Supposedly it was started by an elder out of Australia who's underground. But it is a place that I started to talk about things that were they were blasphemy, right? Because this was spiritual pornography. To be looking at the things, I started looking at ex-witness sites, and this was called spiritual pornography by the Watchtower Society. So I was still, at one point, I'd read this stuff at night, I'd talk to these people, then I'd go to the meetings, and of course by then they're blasting the internet, and I'm sitting there thinking, oh, the governing body knows where I was online last night. That's how paranoid that I got. And I mean, that was for real. School projects really helped me. School is not the answer for everyone, but for me to have the school projects, to do the school projects were really my therapy. Made me work through my issues from my family as well as the religious stuff. And then I had a couple of new friends. I think it only takes one or two. I had one friend that left with me out of the local congregation at the same time, and we kind of supported one another. But she had a lot of family, so she kind of faded away. And when I actually wrote a letter and disassociated myself, she kind of veered away from me. South Park was one of my healing tools. It was very healing for me to be irreverent, and so that was very helpful for me. So again, now we have internet supports, we have online groups, there are a million Facebook groups. I always encourage people to use discernment with those. But therapy was not on my list. This is why I'm so adamant about teaching other therapists and also helping people myself in my own work now. I'm going to talk just a little bit about what our struggles are. Just going to go through these real quickly. The one that I hear from people quite a bit is, what if they're right? Nope, I don't believe this stuff anymore. Nope, I don't want to serve this God anymore because he's just always waiting to get me in trouble. But what if they're right? What if Armageddon comes and I'm on the wrong side? It's really hard for people to join new communities sometimes. I've recently realized that the very thing that makes something a cult is what I miss when I go to some new group, and that is we all believe the same, that glue. I miss that, but I don't want to find that in a new group either. Sometimes people have a lot of shame. They get stuck in this whole I'm a sinner, and I've fallen short. The trust issues, people have problems making decisions, and of course the shunning. My own mother died 3 years ago. I found out through Facebook. But I knew that's what I was choosing, and I kind of made my peace with that. But when it happens, you know, it's still your mom, and your mom died. And I didn't see her for the last 20 years. Sometimes people say they feel mind-fucked, that they just can't get past all the stuff that was done to them to get them to believe whatever they were believing. And also fear of worldly authority sometimes prevents people from getting the supports that they could from support programs. So this PowerPoint is going to go up on my website. I'm not going to talk too much. These are two concepts that I use in therapy. As a therapist, I learned about these from Dr. Ross. They were very helpful to me in my own personal work. As far as shame is concerned, and ambivalent attachment is about when you have a push-pull. You know, I don't want to leave because I'm going to lose all my friends, but I don't believe this stuff either. And so there's a real push-pull. So this is a link. I'm not going to go to it, but I'll put it again on my website. If I could go back in time and think about how could I have avoided all this, education. The website this links to is got a whole list of things to look for besides the criteria that Lifton put out there. Education, and I don't think we're doing too much to educate children about these things in school, unfortunately. So these are the resources I used, and I welcome you to go find my website. It's Freedom from Cults. I'll have some cards up here. I have cards and brochures, and you can find the information, online. Here. So that's it. I thank you for your attention. This is who I am today. I call myself a seeker. This is something that I do called soul collage. So I think we're going to close down the live part now, correct?
Yes. Well, let me just officially say thank you, Cathy, for a really wonderful presentation. It was really very interesting. Yeah, we'll close down, and then we can all talk.